A 12-day war and a tentative peace.
A president who is known for his opposition to the so-called forever wars. So perhaps there is a way to find a roadmap and essentially turn this ceasefire into something more permanent going forward.
This week, a full measure special report. We take a deep look at the U.S.-Iranian conflict that has gone unresolved through 9 presidencies.
An ongoing war in the Mideast may seem far away, but some are raising real concerns about the threat within.
My biggest concern was this open border was the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
We look at the American infiltration and how the danger may already be at our doors.
The federal debt is probably not the existential threat that keeps you awake at night.
Our fiscal weakness is a huge national security weakness.
This week, a few reasons why you might want to pay attention to the nation's negative balance.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin with the powder keg in the Mideast and America's role. The destruction of Iran's nuclear sites marks the most significant U.S. intervention in the region since the Gulf War that began in 1990. The resulting dynamic has the potential to reshape a place where war has been a constant for thousands of years, defined more recently by Iran's hostility toward Israel and the U.S., its nuclear ambitions, and its role in global oil markets. In the span of a week, the U.S. shifted from the brink of global conflict to a fragile ceasefire. President Trump's Operation Midnight Hammer struck Iran's nuclear sites. It was a follow-on to Israel's Operation Rising Lion to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran's vast oil reserves make it a critical player in global energy markets and politics. Iran also controls the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes through. If Iran makes good on threats to block it, it could spike prices and disrupt global supply chains. Alex Vitanka is an expert on Iran. Can you give us an overview or your analysis of what's happening now with the Iran-Israel-U.S. situation?
So we are in a ceasefire right now. The 3 parties to the conflict, Iran, Israel, and to some extent the United States, have decided this is the time to have a ceasefire. The Iranians had their own reasons to say yes. Will they stay the course? I think they will, because this was the most intense war they had fought. Israel has never fought a war like this before, and the Iranians certainly have never fought a war like this before. And the United States kind of got what it wanted by striking those nuclear facilities. But going forward, really, it's tough to see. Unless there's a political will to sit down and have a political agreement, then we might down the road just be back at where we are now, Iran having a nuclear program and U.S. and Israel being concerned.
The roots of conflict trace to the 1950s. Iran's leader nationalized oil, threatening Western markets. The CIA's Operation Ajax ousted him in a coup and empowered a more pro-Western ruler called a Shah.
The 1953 coup obviously happened at a very different time. It's the beginning of the Cold War, and the British, who had been in charge of Iran's oil and the income that came from oil, were very angry when a new Iranian Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, comes and nationalizes that oil. And the British are saying, this is our oil. And the Iranians are saying, no, it's our oil, it's on our soil. So the United States gets involved, the Prime Minister is removed. This is 1953, August of 1953. But there are plenty of Iranians who still think that was the original sin of the United States, intervening in their domestic affairs and getting rid of a Prime Minister that was beloved by many.
In the 1970s, Iran thrived as a modernizing pro-Western monarchy with the capital Tehran, a cosmopolitan hub. But the Shah's authoritarian rule and U.S. ties fueled unrest. In 1979, a revolution established an Islamic republic grounded in strict Muslim religious ideology, led by a religious Ayatollah.
Good evening. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by...
The same year, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy, holding 66 Americans hostage for 444 days. Iran finally released the U.S. hostages minutes after the inauguration of tough-talking Ronald Reagan in 1981.
When action is required to preserve our national security, we will act. We will maintain sufficient strength to prevail if need be.
Reagan backed Iraq's Saddam Hussein in the Iraq-Iran war. There was also the Iran-Contra scandal.
I came here to tell you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The U.S. covertly helped with the sale of weapons to Iran. It was part of a bargain to free other American hostages held by the Iran-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, in power for 37 years, has fueled death to America and Israel rhetoric, calling Israel a cancerous tumor that must be removed. I think he said that in 2006, which obviously is disturbing and upsetting to Israel and its allies. What are his views on the West?
So if you ask Ali Khamenei, are you anti-Western? He would say, no, I am not. I am opposed to Western domination. That's how he would sort of probably sell the narrative. I don't buy that. And I have to say, a lot of people inside the regime push back. We know from the various accounts that have come out that other senior leaders in the regime told Khamenei, this course you've chosen means confrontation and nothing else. If I had to point to one individual, say you are the most responsible for where Iran is today, for this conflict with Israel, for why the United States took action against you, it would be the decisions that Ali Khamenei has made since Supreme Leader, going back to June 1989.
A nuclear-armed Iran is seen as a grave threat. President Obama signed a deal to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions, but it was criticized as weak and scrapped by Trump in 2018. Obama also secretly returned $1.7 billion in cash to Iran. In 2023, President Biden unfroze $6 billion more in Iranian assets as part of a prisoner swap. Critics argue the money from Obama and Biden helped Iran build its anti-Western terrorist forces. They include the Palestinian Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq. Notable Iran-backed attacks include 1983, Hezbollah's bombing in Lebanon that killed 241 U.S. troops. In 1996, the Khobar Towers attack in Saudi Arabia killed 19 U.S. airmen. Iran armed militias in Iraq targeting U.S. forces. In 2024, the Iranian government plotted to assassinate Trump before the election, according to U.S. prosecutors. How and why does Iran have these so-called proxies, or these, small armies that operate out of different countries?
So basically, the way I look at the Islamic Republic, despite all its bravado, it's a weak state. The fundamental weakness it has is that it does not have its own people behind it. So one of the reasons they've gone into the region and tried to cultivate like-minded groups in places like Iraq and Lebanon among the Palestinians in Yemen is because maybe they could actually have more luck recruiting Arabs than the Iranians.
The October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, killing over 1,200 people, heightened fears about Iran's nuclear progress. Last October, on the anniversary of that attack, Zohar Palti, Israel's ex-Mossad intelligence chief, telegraphed what was to come.
Israel will come to a junction right now that if it will continue like that, with the Hamas, with Hezbollah and things like that, we'll have to take a really serious decision whether or not to go to the head of the octopus and not to deal with all the other ones.
All eyes are on the U.S., Israel, and Iran as they navigate what's next in the high-stakes saga that spanned decades. If Iran became friendlier with the U.S. and Israel, would it be a more prosperous and better country, do you think?
If you listen to Iranians inside of Iran on their national television, debates, they're saying that. They're saying our foreign policy has killed our economy. Iran should ideally, and has the potential to be a top 20 economy in the world. It has the world's largest oil and gas reserves combined. It has a population of 19 million that's fairly educated. It has plenty of other resources in terms of natural resources. and it's geographically located in a very desirable place. Lots of things that could change for Iran for the better. The foreign policy needs a major kick, major adjustments, a wake-up call. And I do wonder if what we just witnessed over the last few weeks with the war between Israel and Iran, if that is the moment for that wake-up call, that they come to their senses and they say, look, the Supreme Leader is 86. He's the reason why we're here. We shouldn't listen to him anymore. Somebody try and figure out how we can sideline him. Because if that doesn't happen, the opposite, the much darker version of what could happen is the hardliners come to conclude that the only way they can survive as a regime is to weaponize their nuclear program. They go the other way. They double down. That's a dark future to sort of think about, just not for the Iranian people, but also for the US and Israel, because they will be stuck with what to do next. More conflict, more wars. And again, I hate to think that might be a place where we're going, but that could well be where we end up.
For more on this story and our other reports, check out my podcast, Full Measure After Hours. Coming up on Full Measure, is America prepared for the next terror threat? Iran's backing of terrorism has been a critical concern in the Mideast, but it's also a real worry here, particularly with millions of unknown foreigners crossing illegally into the U.S. in recent years. Lisa Fletcher has more.
I said the last 4 years, my biggest concern was this open border was the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
Border czar Tom Homan believes years of open borders have left America vulnerable.
I pulled numbers this morning just from a CBP under Joe Biden. There was 1,272 nationals of Iran released in the country between OFO and the Border Patrol. And you compare that to the Trump administration, zero, right? Zero releases. Over 2 million people crossed that border. We don't know who they are, where they came from, because they got away, because Border Patrol is so overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis that Biden created that over 2 million people crossed the border and got away.
For example, Eagle Pass, Texas, a crucial point on the U.S.-Mexico border. For much of the Biden administration, this area saw tens of thousands of illegal crossings into the U.S. by people from more than 160 countries.
Hola, bienvenido. ¿De dónde es? This group tells us they've just come in from Honduras and Venezuela.
Since President Trump returned to the White House in January, crossings have dramatically decreased. But there's growing concern over potential threats from people who've already crossed into the U.S., especially at a time of extreme tension with Iran, a nation with a long history of sponsoring terrorist attacks. Just last weekend, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrested 11 Iranian nationals illegally in the United States. One was a former Iranian army sniper. Another admitted having ties to Hezbollah. Part of a trend of illegal migrants from countries the U.S. has identified as terrorism hotspots. Retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding served as a senior director of the National Security Council in the first Trump administration. We talked to him last September.
The Iranians, though, the religious fervor that's associated with that regime is of a different character than the Russians, the Chinese, or the North Koreans, who are all atheists. So I think that brings an element into it when you bring nuclear weapons into it that, I think could be very, very dangerous.
Spalding believes a focus on Iran's nuclear program highlights the ongoing danger from the most destructive weapons on Earth.
A terrorist attack is bad. It creates a lot of spectacle. It does create attention in media, but it is nothing. It is nothing compared to nuclear war. And I think, me personally, we were so close to Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II and the subsequent decades that there was still palpable fear. And I think when we stop thinking about that and being concerned about that and being afraid of that, then we actually have allowed these conditions to materialize that bring us closer to it. That's, to me, the most fearful thing that we face right now. It has never gone away. It's still there.
How much of a threat remains from groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State?
Well, I think it's the same threat that it's always been, and I don't think it was ever an existential threat. The threat comes less so from a physical ability to change the character of Western civilization and more ideological. And so we're seeing manifestations of that. I mean, the anti-Semitism that has grown within the United States is off the charts. And where is it coming from? It's coming from that same stuff that was coming on TikTok, you know, supporting Hamas and saying, you know, Israel's an evil regime. And so we have to recognize that the threats, although the ones that are flashy are the terrorist attacks, the real threat is coming directly into our communities, coming directly into our homes, and it's this digital threat that is slowly changing the character, I believe, of the free world. If you agree that we're in a Cold War, and you agree that there is alignment, at least alignment between China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, well, then you can see that if there's a campaign going on anywhere in the world, let's pick Taiwan. If there's something going on over Taiwan, and you're not quite sure who's come across the southern border, then if you do have something going on there, then you're likely to see things happening here. And those things could be, you know, infrastructure attacks or terrorist attacks. I believe infrastructure attacks are far more probable because of the implications to our greater society.
Some have recently said that the terrorism warning lights are blinking red again, just as they were before 9/11. Do you agree with that?
I agree that we've taken a number of actions that have brought the situation into the country.
What's the worst thing we've done?
Well, I mean, it's really the southern border. I mean, we just have no idea who's come across the border.
For Full Measure, I'm Lisa Fletcher in Washington.
Ahead on Full Measure, drowning in debt American style. Republicans in Congress have set a target to pass President Trump's one big, beautiful budget bill by the 4th of July, but there are still a lot of hurdles. A big one is all the spending it calls for and concerns over growing the national debt. Scott Thuman talks with Maya McGinnis of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a bipartisan nonprofit founded in the 80s.
When the next president takes office in January, what financial shape do you believe he or she will find this government in?
I mean, the country is in terrible financial shape right now. Probably the most worrisome thing is that interest payments are the second largest line item in our budget. We spend more on interest payments than we do on national defense.
For 2024, those interest payments projected to be $892 billion, ahead of defense at $849 billion. Only Social Security costs more. So what would you say they're walking into?
They are walking into just an absolute fiscal disaster if we don't make changes. We're walking into that fiscal disaster with candidates for president promising basically not to do anything to fix it, and including lots of new promises that would actually make the situation worse.
Is it because they don't really have true intentions of fixing the problem, or because it's just so unpopular to acknowledge they might raise your taxes that we're not hearing anything about it?
We used to have leaders who knew that we had to make changes to fiscal policy, knew that we had to have spending caps, and there was something called pay-go. If you want a new policy, a new tax cut, you offset it, you pay for it. That's what budgeting is. Instead of continuing with those norms, we've changed to one, we don't even have budgets anymore.
President Trump's tax cuts passed back in 2017 are due to expire next year. Do both candidates plan to extend them, and if so, how do they pay for that?
So these tax cuts were unaffordable when we passed them. There was a great need for tax reform because we weren't competitive in many ways, but we should have offset those tax cuts. We didn't, and it added trillions to the national debt. You now have President Trump and Republicans saying they want to extend those taxes, though to their credit, a number of them are saying they want to offset the costs. But you also have the Democrats who opposed the tax cuts at the time, saying that they also want to extend the majority of them, those for everybody making under $400,000, which ends up being most people with the taxes. So we're talking about an extension that would actually cost $3, $4, possibly $5 trillion more if we don't pay for that.
One of the biggest economic concerns for voters this year, the possibility of a recession.
If she gets in, you're heading for the Depression of 1929.
We hear more and more these days the R word, recession.
Yep.
How are we going to be able to handle a recession knowing the debt that we're facing?
If we have a recession, it will be the wrong time to talk about raising taxes and cutting spending, the things we need to do to fix the fiscal situation. But it may be more difficult to borrow for that recession, and either way, we will come out of any recession with even more debt than we had when we went in, and all of the changes we will have to make to ultimately rebalance our budget will be so much more painful.
Has enough time passed that we're able to say now whether or not Trump or Biden in their respective 4 years have raised the debt?
The clear picture is that the debt went up by trillions under both of these political leaders, close to $8 trillion, about half of that not counting COVID for President Trump, and about $4 trillion, about half of that not counting COVID for President Biden. And that is how much they approved, both through legislation.
Because we're in such dire straits financially, are other countries, our foes, China, Russia, are they trying to take advantage of us?
Our fiscal weakness is a huge, huge national security weakness. We can't respond to as many crises as once as we used to be able to. And absolutely, our rivals around the world are well aware of this situation. In order to be the strongest country right now, it's not just about the military and boots on the ground. That's part of it, but it's also economic, it's also digital. All of these things matter. But our economic strength is absolutely key to our role in the world, and we are, frankly, flushing it down the toilet by running up our national debt in a way that leaves us so vulnerable geopolitically.
For the next resident of the White House, add to the stack of existential threats our national debt. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman in Washington.
After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, a whistleblower reveals the unthinkable buried in our record-breaking illegal immigration crisis. The implication of what you're reporting is that the federal government is using taxpayer money to facilitate the end of the trip for the human traffickers.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing less than taxpayer-funded child slavery, nothing less.
The border crisis and child trafficking in America next week on Full Measure. Until next time, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.